Talk about the dramatic monologue as a poetic form. The poems from Browning that you read today are examples of that poetic form. You're probably aware of it, probably learned about it in high school, but it's worth laying out the primary qualities of a dramatic monologue to ease us into the great Browning monologues you read, dramatic monologues you read for today and tomorrow. First thing to note in a dramatic monologue, the speaker is a character who is obviously not the poet. Robert Browning is obviously not Porphyria's lover who commits murder. He's obviously not the Duke and the Last Duchess who had a murder committed. Second is that the poem takes the form of one speech of this particular speaker or persona. There are no other voices in the poem, and certainly we never see a time when the poet him or herself breaks into the poem. So a single character who's obviously not the poet, the poem being an entire speech of this particular character. 3, the only way that we know that the poet is speaking to an audience is because the poet is addressing someone, an interlocutor. The interlocutor, again, never speaks, nor is the interlocutor described by the poet. So we only know that the Duke is talking to an envoy for the family of the woman he wants to marry because he's addressing this person. 4, the speech takes place at a time of a very critical time, an intense time, an interesting time. Porphyria's lover, the speech takes place before, during, and after the murder. With My Last Duchess, the speech takes place at a pivotal time when the Duke is trying to negotiate with the family for his next wife. We can say the same of Andrea del Sarto, where we see the faultless painter sort of struggling with his own inability to create a masterpiece, and also his own inability to garner the affection of his wife, who is yearning to break away from him and go be with a cousin who's probably just another lover. So that would be the 4th quality. And the 5th quality of the dramatic monologue is that the speaker's character is revealed through what this speaker says, often in complicated, subtle ways. We'll talk about that a lot in the case of Byron. So persona, not the poet. The whole poem is one long speech. The only way we know that an audience is there is because the speaker is addressing an audience. The poem takes place at a critical juncture, and the poem, through the language of the speaker, reveals the complexity of the character of the speaker. So we can think of, in addition to Browning's dramatic monologues that you're now reading, an earlier dramatic monologue. In some ways, Wordsworth's Tintern Abbey is a dramatic monologue because he's speaking to his sister Mary, Dorothy, sorry. But the poem lacks the kind of dramatic complexity, the irony that shows up in a Browning poem. But I think that to some extent that poem could be an early example of the dramatic monologue lacking the kind of irony and subtlety we see with Browning. Certainly Ulysses by Tennyson, which we've already looked at, qualifies as a dramatic monologue. If you look to the 20th, well, actually another great Victorian dramatic monologue would be Dover Beach by Matthew Arnold. Maybe you've come across that. 20th century, T.S. Eliot, Love Song of Geoffrey Prufrock, Lady Lazarus by Sibylle Plath. These are just some poems you may have come across. Now, what makes Browning such an important dramatic monologuist? As I'm saying to you, as I've mentioned, there's a psychological subtlety in Browning that we certainly don't see in Wordsworth and that we rarely see in any other dramatic monologuist. The thing to look for in a Browning dramatic monologue are the speaker's blind spots. Is the speaker speaking about a version of reality that is blind to another version of reality that we're aware of? That's where the real action is for a Browning dramatic monologue. So we have to ask, does the Duke really know that he's revealing to this envoy that he had his last wife murdered And is he revealing this indirectly in hopes of sending a message to this envoy that this new wife had better be more obedient? If he knows that, well, then that's not a blind spot. He's very aware of what he's doing. If he doesn't know that, that suggests that he's expressing feelings that he probably doesn't really want to express. In other words, there's a conflict between his conscious expression and maybe some unconscious urges within him. So that's where the ambiguity of Browning comes in. And I'm going to talk in another lecture about how irony plays into this ambiguity. And also talk in another lecture about a primary, I guess, psychological component of Browning's dramatic monologues. And that is, we often see characters trying to abdicate responsibility. Characters feel guilty. Characters have done something they know is wrong, even if they don't feel guilty. Characters feel like failures, but they're trying to justify, in many cases, why they are where they are. And frequently that justification will come in the form of an effort to abdicate responsibility. Well, it wasn't my fault. The Duke suggests, well, wasn't my fault that I killed the last Duchess, because look at what she did. If she had not done these things, if she'd not flirted with other men, if she'd not loved other things and people as much as she seemed to love me, then I wouldn't have had to do that. It was her fault. Same with Porphyria's lover. There's a sense that it's her fault for causing him to feel like he feels. So we'll pay attention to that too as we look at the monologues, dramatic monologues of Browning. So you have, I guess, the five basic components of the dramatic monologue now.